All right, Rabbosai, good morning, Afreilich and Purim. Wonderful to see everyone here. Baruch Hashem, excited to an incredible day today, right? Purim, Erev Shabbos, Daf Yomi, just feels like something amazing is getting ready to happen. So beginning by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all of the Shumer and Drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Dina Bas Pesach, Zechariah ben Zechariah. We also thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Gabi and Shana Cohn, for dedicating the shir this morning in commemoration of the Garzait of Shana's grandfather, Kalman Eliezer ben Avram Halevi, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an Aliyah, and the families a Nechama. Rabbi, with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Tzadik Zayin. So we have a lot to do today in Meretz Hashem, 97, and we are picking up, I believe we left off at the two dots. Is that correct? On Tzadik Vav Amadeus, 96b? Does that look about right? Yeah, good. So the Gemara says this also. So remember, the two dots, Achar Shlitas HaPesach, Yavi Shlamim. So if you remember again, excuse me. Oh, 1 second. I'm sorry, I did not start this. So we'll say, so we're picking up Tzadik Vav Amadeus 96b at the two dots, approximately 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, okay, a lot of lines are from the bottom, to write that at the two dots. So we'll say, remember again, we were speaking about in the Mishnah an interesting distinction, namely that if you go ahead and you separate out a Korban Pesach, we'll call it A, and then you lose A, you replace A with B, and then you go ahead and you find A. So what's the halacha concerning A? What's the halacha concerning A? So remember again, the Mishnah made a distinction, and the distinction of the Mishnah ultimately is that it depends what happened to B at the time that you found A. The Mishnah indicated that if halacha l'maisa you had already sacrificed B, then A could be offered up as a shlamim immediately. However, if you went ahead and you found A before you offered B, then you have to allow A to graze, develop a mum, sell it, and then use the money to go ahead and purchase a shlamim. So as I said, I just want to clarify one point, because this is probably going to be the most important point for the Gemara going forward, which is what's the nature of this distinction? So the Gemara understands as follows. If A is alive, if A is found before B has been offered, then both A and B effectively have the status of a Korban Pesach. Now remember, you can't have two Pesach offerings. You can't have two Karbanos Pesach. Two Karbani Pesach. You can't have that. You can't have two Pesachim. Right? You can't go ahead and have that. And therefore, again, Rashi called it what's called Dichui. Dichui means the animal is effectively set aside for non-use, which is why you can't offer it up as a shlamim. You have to let it graze, develop a mum, then go ahead and sell it off. However, if you find A after B has already been slaughtered, then under those circumstances, halacha l'maisa again, when A is found, A is not looked at as a Pesach anymore. Why isn't A looked at as a Pesach? Why not? Why not? Because B has already been offered. Now again, even though A was initially designated as a Pesach, but at the end of the day, by the time A is found, B has already been offered. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, A doesn't have its designation as Pesach anymore. And remember, Rabbi say, Korban Pesach at its core is considered to be a what? A shlamim. So therefore, again, once it no longer has a Pesach designation, its default designation is going to be as a shlamim. So we'll say that's pretty much the operative principle that defines this entire sugya. So now we can go. Let's go. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Lo shanu ela shenimtza achar shchita v'hemer ba'achar shchita. By the way, the Mishnah also throws in that whatever the Mishnah also adds in that whatever is true in the case of losing an animal and then replacing another and then finding it, also applies if you were to do tamura. Remember again, if you were to swap out one animal for another. So if you were to go ahead and do tamura on this animal that was lost and was found, what's the status of that tamura? So essentially, whatever the status of the lost and then found animal is the status of the tzmura as well. So Amar Rava says, when does the principle of the Mishnah apply? Lo shano ela shenimtzeis achar shchita vehemer bo achar shchita. This is only true if you went ahead and You went ahead and you found it after shchita. So we'll say, if halacha l'maisa, you lost A, right? You had A, you lost A, designated B, slaughtered B, and then found A. What's the halacha? Then ultimately, again, when you find A, halacha l'maisa, so A could be immediately offered up as a shlamim. So too, if you were to do temura with A, it would be considered a shlamim. Aval nimtza kodem shchita v'hemer ba'achar shchita. However, if we're both saying, listen to this again, you have A, you lost A, replaced it with B, found A before you slaughtered B, then ultimately again, then the Gemara says, Aval nimtza kodem shchita. However, if you went ahead and you found A before shchita, v'hemer ba'achar shchita, but you went ahead and you did temura with A after shchita, temurasa mikoach kedusha dechuya ka'asa v'lo karba. So we'll say this is really fascinating. So we'll say what's fascinating about this is as follows. Rav is suggesting like this. We'll say just one more piece that's going to be technical, and then the rest is going to be smooth sailing. So we'll say, so now listen to this. So Rav is suggesting as follows. I designate A, I lose A, I replace it with B. Okay? Now I slaughter B, and then I find A. Or let's say differently. I go ahead, before I slaughter B, I find B, I find A, thank you. Now, if I find A, thank you. I find A. Now, remember, if we stop right there, we know the halacha. What's the halacha? A cannot be offered up. It's duchuya, because remember, two Pesachs were alive at the same time. So A is left to graze, develop a mum, sell it off, use the money for kachim. Here's what Rav is adding. Let's say, so now I found A before I slaughtered B. Okay, now I slaughter B, and now I do a temura with A. So I tried to swap out A for another animal. So I might have been tempted to say that halacha l'maisa again, since the temura is happening after B was already offered, therefore the temura itself should at least be a shlamim, to which Rava comes along and says, no, since the temura is a derivative of Kedusha Dechuya, of what we call, remember again, because A was alive at the same time as B, therefore the Temura is Dechuya as well, and therefore even the Temura animal has to be left, set out to graze, develop a mum, sell it off, and then use the money to purchase shlamim. Incredible. So says the Gemara, because that's the Lashon over here, because the Gemara says, since Temurasa mikoach kedusha dechuya kaasa. The temura is coming as a result of kedusha dechuya. Kedusha dechuya is the lashon that's used when you have two karbanos pesach alive at the same time. So again, the one that's not going to be offered is nidche, is set aside. The temura is a derivative of kedusha dechuya, and therefore the temura ultimately again must be treated as A is treated as well, namely set out to graze, develop a mum, sell it off, use the money for shlamim. Esei Abai doesn't like this. Im kasev, when the pasuk says im kasev, we'll say the pasuk the Gemara is going to be quoting over here is talking about the halachos of karbanos. Im minatzon karbanol b'zeva shlamim l'Hashem zachron the keva tam yakrivenu. Torah is just giving me over here the basic halachos for karbanos. So when it says im kasev, ma tamud lomer im kasev. Why does it have to say im kasev? L'rabos temuras hapesach achar hapesach shekarva shlamim. It's to teach me that if I do temura on what we call a leftover carbon Pesach after Pesach, then halacha l'maisa it is offered up as a shlamim. Says, well, what's the case? Hechi domi. If you tell me that it's a case where halacha l'maisa, I went ahead and I find A. We're going to just keep with the same case. I find A after B has already been slaughtered, and I do the temura on A after B has already been slaughtered. Pshita. The Rabbi say it's obvious because both A and its temura will be treated as a shlamim. Lama likra. Elalav shenimtza kodim shchita v'erebo achar shchita. Or rather, says Abaye, the Chiddush case must be like this: that even if you find A before you shechted B, which I will say again, remember, what's the status of A if you find it before you slaughter B? What's the status? One word. Okay, half a word. A syllable, something, a letter. You want to buy a vowel. Right? Dechuya, right? Remember, if you find A at the same time that B is alive, it's dechuya. Abai says, however, if after then you slaughter B, and then you do a temura on A, Abai suggested, Allah Chalamaisa, that temura is going to be a shlamim. To which the Gemara said, no, maybe not. Maybe Abai, you're wrong. Maybe Rav is right. The Olam Shnimtza Achar Shchita, Verba Achar Shchita. In reality, the pasuk's talking about a case where you find A after B has been slaughtered, and you did Tamura on A after B has been slaughtered. And even though that sounds like an obvious case, Ukra Asmachta Ba'alma. You're right. I don't really need a pasuk to teach me that case, but the pasuk is what's called an asmachta. I will say, right, sometimes the Torah will go ahead and bring down a scriptural allusion, or will find a scriptural allusion, even though I don't need it to prove the halacha, because the halacha is quite intuitive. Nevertheless, we'll have a pasuk that supports it. Ella, kralamai asas. We'll say, if that's the case, then what does the pasuk come to teach me? Kidisanya. I will say, as it stated. So we'll say, so I just want to point out over here what it said. Well, let's finish. Ella kralamai asa, kidisanya. Kesev l'rabos esa pesach la'alyo. The word kesef comes to include that by a carbon pesach, the fat of the tail ultimately is offered up on the mizbeach. Kishu omer im kesef, when it says im kesef, im is a riboy, come to including something else. L'rabos pesach she'avra shnaso, u'shlamim haboin machmas pesach l'chol mitzos shlamim. So we'll say it comes to include as follows. Carbon pesach must be an animal that was within its first year. If the animal is above a year old, it ages out. It ages out. So what happens to a Karban Pesach which ages out? It becomes a shlamim. Which you're supposed to hear the incredible musar in this. The incredible musar in this is sometimes in life, as we get older, so there are people who become fixated on what they were able to do in their younger years, on their opportunities in their younger years. And they can't get over the fact that now, in their older years, in this different tekufa, this different stage of life, they don't have the same opportunities as they had in the past. And the truth is, when you live like that, you waste all of the opportunities that are presently in front of you. What does the Gemara say? It's beautiful to be a Pesach. It's beautiful to be a Pesach. So that first year of the animal's life has the opportunity to be a Pesach. Then what happens after you phase out, after you age out of being a Pesach? What do you become? A shlamim. Every single stage in life it has its own opportunities. And every single stage in life brings with it the opportunities of growth. And remember, the opportunities of old age are not the same opportunities of youth. And the opportunities of my adult years are not the same as my teenage years. Every tekufa brings its own opportunities, but never get fixated on the missed opportunities of the past. Maximize the opportunities of the present. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says that halacha l'maaseh, if you have a Karban Pesach that aged out, or for that matter, again, shlamim, that come, what we call machmas Pesach, which is essentially any carbon that was originally designated as a Pesach, can't be offered up as a Pesach, now is offered up as a shlamim, sheton smicha, unisachim, utenufas chazei v'shok. That ultimately, again, requires smicha, leaning on it, nisachim, libations, tenufas chazei v'shok, the waving of the chest and the thigh, kushu omer v'im eis, and if ultimately, and when the pasuk says v'im eis, a ram or a goat, hifsika inyan limed ala eis she'in tu'una alya, comes teaching by a goat that halacha l'maisa, a goat does not have an obligation of offering up the tail fat. Iked masni la'aresha. So I'll say, so there are others who go ahead and explain this in a different way. So they go ahead and explain this machlokes in a bit of a different way. Ha-Pesach shenim sakodem shchitas ha-Pesach. So we'll say, here we go. Same case as before. We'll say, we're really, it's going to be targeted precision on one particular case. So remember again, Pesach shenim sakodem shchitas ha-Pesach. So this is the idea. I had A, lost A, replaced it with B, and now I find A. When am I finding A? Before I've offered up B. So now watch this. What's the halacha? What do I do with A? Yira ad she'istai b'yimach v'yavdam shlomim. So halacha, I say I have to let A go out and graze, develop a mum, and then sell it off and use the money to buy shlomim. V'chein temura. So the same applies to the temura of A. Amar Rava. So Rava says, when is this so? Lo shanu ela shenimsa kodem shchita v'hemer bar kodem shchita. This is only true that the temura of A is treated like A when you both find A and do the temura of A before the shchita of B. Avol nimsa kodem shchita v'hemer bo achar shchita. But if halacha l'maisa, you go ahead and you find A before the shchita of B, but you only do temura on A after the shchita of B, then temuraso kareva shlomim. Then ultimately, again, although A has to be set out to graze, develop a mum, sell it off, use the money to buy shlamim, the temura of A has the ability to be offered up immediately as shlamim. So it says the Gemara, my time, what's the reason? Kikava shrita midi de chazile. Midi de lo chazile lo kava. Because Rabbi say, halacha l'maisa, the shrita of Pesach only endows Pesach identity to something that is fit to be offered up as Pesach. But something that's not fit to be offered up as Pesach is not endowed with Pesach identity. So halacha l'maisa, again, you could only go ahead and have, did I do something wrong? You could only go ahead and halacha l'maisa have one korban Pesach. And therefore halacha l'maisa, Pesach B is never truly endowed with Pesach identity, and therefore the Tumura itself will be totally fine. Says the Gemara, raises the kasha, im kesev, ma talmud lomar. When it says im kesev, what is it coming to teach me? So, okay. Chevron Zoom, do you hear me all right? Yeah? No, it's okay, sorry. All right. Abai says, Im kesev, ma talmud lomar, l'rabos tumuras hapesach achar hapesach. So Abai says, when the pasuk says Im kesev, what is it coming to teach me? It's coming to teach me tumuras hapesach achar hapesach shekar v'shlamim. It's coming to teach you that halacha l'maisa, tumuras pesach after pesach is offered up as shlamim. So let's analyze the case. Top of Tzadik Zayin, yochel af lifnei pesach came. You might have thought that the same is true ultimately on Pesach. Talmud lomar hu karev ve'in temuras hapesach kreva. Therefore, the pasuk says it is offered, but the temura is not offered. So hechidami, what's the case? If you say that halacha l'maisa A was found before the shchita of B, and temura was done before shchita as well, so pshita, then that's obvious. Not only krawara in that case, alalav shenimtza kodem shchita vehemer bo achar shchita. Rather, ultimately, again, it must be that halacha l'maisa it was found before shchita, and temura was done after shchita. And halacha l'maisa, again, we see that it still has the identity as the nidcha animal. Tiyufta the Rava, tiyufta. And I will say this effectively goes ahead and refutes Rava's position. I will say, that interestingly enough, the halacha actually does follow Rava. So I will say, so I just want to point out, therefore, again, if you kind of follow the Mishnah as follows, here's what we have. What we have is, if I separate A, lose A, replace it with B. And now I go ahead and I find A. What's the status of A? So again, everything depends halacha l'maisa as to what happened to B. If I find A, straightforward halacha, if I find A after B has been slaughtered, great. Then halacha l'maisa, A is going to be a shlamim. Right? A is a shlamim, straight up shlamim, no problem. If I find A before I slaughtered B, now we have a problem that A is what's called nidcha. It's nidcha. It's set aside for non-use because there are two Pesachs that are in existence at the same time. All that Rava is adding in over here is something very interesting. In an interesting twist of the case, if halacha l'maisa, I were to find A before I slaughtered B, but only do a temura after I slaughter B, what happens then? So Rava comes along and says, a temura is always a derivative of the mothership, right? Whatever the mother animal is, I say mother, male or female, I'm saying whatever, it's a derivative kedusha. So whatever the primary animal is, that's what the derivative is as well. So Rav is just suggesting, if the primary animal is nidcha, because A was found while B was still alive, then halacha l'maisa, the derivative animal is nidcha as well. That's it. Good. Says the Gemara, Amr Shmuel, this is fascinating. Amr Shmuel, Kol shebechatos mesa, bepesach karav shlamim. Listen to this, Rabbi. Rav Shmuel says as follows. Any case of a chatos that is left to die, if the same situation were to come up in Karban Pesach, it would be offered up as a shlamim. V'chol shebechatos roa, and any time in a chatos case, you would let an animal out to pasture, to graze, then bepesach nami roa. Then by Karban Pesach, ultimately, again, it is also left to graze. So so take a look at Rashi for just a moment over here. So Rashi says, if you look, Amr Shmuel, this is actually very, these sugis, this is part of the beauty of Daf Yomi, is, you pick up these concepts. So like 5 cases of chatas. Now, it's like you win the lottery. 5 cases of chatas that are left to die. So maybe you're going to get stopped today. Sometimes somebody comes over to make a l'chaim with you on Purim. You have to make small talk. What are you going to talk about? By the way, 5 cases where chatas is left to die, and you're going to say, funny you should ask. We mamish just had it in the daf today. So take a look. Rashi over here, Amar Shmuel, Kol Shechatas Mesa, Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Eina Pesach Krav. So look at Rashi. Kol Shechatas Mesa, here are the cases. Chamish Chatos Mesos, Halacha LeMoshe Misinai. There are 5 cases where a chatas is left to die, which we all said, when I say left to die, that means is 5 cases where the chatas becomes invalid, but Ibamish can't do anything. What they literally do is they just put it in a cage, they don't feed it, and it starves to death. So what are the 5 cases? What are the 5 cases? So the Gemara says, number 1, Vlad chatos. Rashi says, Vlad chatos, the offspring of chatos. So if a chatos animal gives birth, that Vlad is left to die. Tumuras chatos, tomorrow the exchange of a chatos. Chatos shemesu ba'alel, interesting case. Let's see, you have Ruvain has to give a chatos, and then Ruvain died. You can't offer up a chatos without an owner, so it's just left to die. The chatos shenis kapru ba'aleha, al yidei ha'acheres sha'avda zos v'achakach nimtzeis v'sha'al. Okay, fine. That's what I'll say. That's the case that we've been talking about, where you had a chatos, lost the chatos, replaced the chatos, then found the chatos, but the owner has already achieved kapara with another animal. That chatos is also left to die. Visha avrash nasa, or a chatos also must be an animal within its first year if the chatos aged out. So these are the 5 cases of chatas. So I will say what Shmuel is coming along and saying over here is that any case in which a chatas would be left to die, ultimately, again, if it were to occur at the Karban Pesach, halacha l'maisa, we would go ahead and Pesach would be offered up as shlamim. Says Rabbi Yochanan says, Eina Pesach karav shlamim, ela shenimtza achar shchita. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, there's only one case where a lost Karban Pesach is offered up as a shlamim, and I will say that's when you find the lost animal, when after the shchita of the replacement one. That's the only case where a Karban Pesach is offered up as a shlamim. Aval kodim shchita lo, but halacha l'maisa, if you find the lost animal before the shchita of the replacement animal, then einachinami, it is not offered up. Maskif Rav Yossi. So Rav Yossi says uklalahu. Is that true? Is this a general principle that Shmuel is espousing? Farichata she'avresh nasa v'l'raya asla. Also, listen to this case. If you have a chatas, ultimately again that aged out, it's set out to pasture. If you have a chatas that is over a year old, then roin osa ki'ilu hi omedes bebeis hakvaras. We go ahead and we view it as if it's standing in a cemetery. Both say very interesting. A chatas is over. What does it mean? You view it as if it's standing in a cemetery. So we'll say, remember again, which is another way of saying it's inaccessible. It's inaccessible. So the Gemara says, "V'ilu b'Pesach ki gavna." Yet, interestingly enough, if you have a Karban Pesach that aged out, what do you do with it? The Gemara says, "Karav shlamim." Ultimately, again, we go ahead and we give that shlamim. So we'll say, see, the principle doesn't work. You told me that any case, well, again, so we see that a chatas and a pesach are not treated the same way. The sanya kesav l'rabos as a pesach la'alya. Kesav comes to include Karban Pesach, that the fat of the tail has to be offered up. Kishu omer im kesav l'rabos as a pesach she'avra shnaso. When it says im kesav, that comes to include a Karban Pesach that aged out. U'l'shlamim habo'in machmas pesach l'chosh mitzvah shlamim. They're treated as a shlamim in totality, namely shetu'unin smicha, unisachim, utinufas chazeh v'shod. They're treated like a shlamim in totality. Smicha, leaning on the animal, the sachim, libations, waving of the chest and the thigh. Kishu omer im eis, hifsika inyon, limed al ha'eis she'ein ta'un al yo. And also when it says eis comes to teaching that from a ram or from a goat, halacha l'mais, we do not offer up the fat of the tail. Amrlei, ki ka'amar Shmuel be'avudin. When Shmuel says halacha, his halacha, that's talking about animals which were lost and then found. B'dichuyin lo amar. He did not, however, state this when it comes to an animal that is nidcha. So we'll say there's a difference between an animal that is lost and an animal that was in existence and actively set aside for non-use because of the presence of another animal or because it actively aged out. To which the Gemara says, va'avid mimishkachasla. What's the case of avud? V'hariavuda b'shas hafrasha. So we'll say if you have a situation where halacha l'maisi, the original animal was lost at the time that the second one was separated, the rabbanon, the l'raya azla. So we'll say according to the rabbanon, that animal will be set out to pasture. This nan Hifrish chatasa va'avda, v'hifrish acheres tachteha. If you separate out a chatas and the chatas was lost, and then you separated out a replacement chatas, v'nimtzeis harishon, and then you find the original animal that was lost, you find a harei shtehen omdos. Both of them are standing before you. Achas mehenti karev, one of them is offered. Ushnia tamos, and the second one is left to die. Because you also remember again, it's a chatas case. So remember again, when you have a chatas shenes kapru ba'aleh ba'acher, when you have a chatas case where the owners achieved atonement through another animal, halacha lamaisa, that first animal, or whatever, the other animal is not offered up, it's left to die. Divrei Rebbe, the Chum say, ain't chatas mesa, the Chum disagree, they say the only time a chatas is left to die, ela shenim seis la'achar shenis kapru bailim, is only if the animal was found after, the original animal was found after the owners achieved atonement. HaKodem shenis kapru bailim. However, again, if you find the original chatas before the owners achieved atonement with the replacement chatas, the Gemara says, roa, ultimately it's left to graze. And yet this is not the same halacha by Pesach. V'ilu b'Pesach, heichad da'avid v'nimtza achar chatzos. So listen to this, I will say. But by Karan Pesach, if you go ahead and you lose A, and then you separate out B, and you find A after chatzos, kodem shchita, this is, I will say, now a new twist. You find A, and when do you find A? After chatzos. But I say, I just realized something amazing. Do you realize what's happening over here? This is absolutely amazing. There's a halacha that says, Shloshim Yom Kodem Achag, 30 days before a Yom Tov, you're supposed to start learning the halachos of that Yom Tov. So we'll say, so it's Purim. Shechianu v'kimanu v'yonu lazman hazeh. And the halacha is on Purim, you have to start learning the halachos of Pesach. So I'll say, isn't this absolutely amazing? In the wee hours of the morning of Purim, we have already been mekayim that halacha. Absolutely amazing. Zachinu. Incredible. Not only a daf of Gemara, but mamish halacha shloshim yom kodem achag. Incredible. And we'll say, I think it's a good simon, because you know what this tells me? This tells me that in Mir Tashem, if this is how we're beginning our Hilchos Pesach, do you know what this means? We're beginning our Hilchos Pesach, not with the halachos of chametz and matzah. We're beginning our Hilchos Pesach with the halachos of Karban Pesach. So maybe, if we make it a truly Hilig Purim, then Emir Hashem will be Zocha, not just to learn the halachos of Chametz Matzah, but Emir Hashem to be able to learn and to practice the halachos of Karban Pesach as well. So the Gemara goes right there. So the incredible. So the Gemara says, what's the case over here? I lost A, and now I separate out B, and I find A after Chatzos, but before Shchita. So this is an interesting case. After Chatzos, but before Shchita, what's the halacha? Karav Shlomim. The carbon is offered up as a Shlomim. Very interesting. We'll see the logic of this. The Gemara says, Shmuel Karebi Svirole. So Shmuel holds. So we'll say, so this is now a new twist. What this is saying is essentially, if you find A after the time that B could have already been offered, then what? It's Ke'ilu, B has been offered already. And remember again, what happens if you find A, by Karban Pesach, you find A after B has already been offered. What's the halacha? A is an automatic shlamim. So this is incredible. So the Gemara says, Shmuel Rebbe Svirle, Shmuel holds like Rebbe. The Amr Avuda Lemisa Azla. He holds again that in general, a lost chatos, right, that's then found, goes to Misa. But Hakal Avuda Lerebbe Misa. The Hakal Avuda Lerebbe Misa. Is that true? That every lost animal, according to Rebbe, is put to death? So the Gemara says, Ve'ilu Pesach. Heicha David Kodim Chatzos V'nimtza Kodim Chatzos Roeh. But yet by Pesach, if I lose A, separate out B, find A again before Chatzos on Erev Pesach is set out to graze. Kodem Chatzos, the Gemara says, Kodem Chatzos, love Avotu. I will say this is great. Before Chatzos, A is incredible. Before Chatzos, A is not really considered to be lost. So we'll say, what does that mean? This is so interesting. When is A really lost? When is A lost? I will say, think about this for just a moment. Only after Chatzos and Erev Pesach. Why? Because that's the only time where halacha l'maisa you could do something with A. This is fascinating. I will say, in other words, that the Gemara says over here, the stat in halacha, things have a status. Everything has a status, right? And your status dictates your respective halachas. So by karbanas, being avoid, being lost, is a status. But you're only considered lost if halacha l'maisa you can't perform your avoda. If you can't perform your avoda, then you're lost. A is not lost until after Chatzos of Erev Pesach. Why? Because you can't do anything with a Karban Pesach until after Chatzos on Erev Pesach. Remember again, it goes back to yesterday's daf. One of the major distinctions between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Mitzrayim, Pesach Doros, is whereas Pesach Mitzrayim had a din of Bikur, right? You had to examine or watch the animal for 4 days. That doesn't apply to Pesach Doros. So also listen to this, the Amarava, Avedas Laila, Lav Shma Aveda. That a Karban that is lost that night, this is incredible, doesn't have the status of being lost. Doesn't have the status of being lost. Why not? Because you can't go ahead and offer up a karban at night. They both say this is an incredible, and there's a musr in here also. They'll say when is something karbanically something considered to be lost? Only when it can't perform its function, right? That's when something is lost. And it's true a lot of times personalistically in life as well. Sometimes we feel so far from the Ribbon Shalom, we feel lost. You're only lost if you can't perform your function. If you could learn Torah, if you could do mitzvahs, if you could be a Baal Chesed, you might have lost your way a little bit, but you're not lost. Halachically, something is only lost if it can't do its avoda. If it can do its avoda, you're not lost. Incredible. Elo roa, elo Rebbe, heichi mishkachas lo. So according to Rebbe, what's the case of roa? What's the case of grazing? Amid beis, kidra boshia. What's that like Raboshia? The Amr Raboshia, hifrish teichatos lachrayis. Listen to this interesting case. A guy went ahead and separated out 2 chatos animals for achrayis. Now, both saying, what does this mean? Look at Rashi, achrayis. Rashi says, she'im tovat ha'achos yavi chaverta. So I'll say what this means is that if halacha l'maisa, if you went ahead, so this is a conscientious individual. See, I have to bring a chatos. So I will say, I'm always scared, I always lose stuff, right? I can never find my keys. It happens with my chatos also. So what do? I separate out 2 animals. 2 animals. So now watch this. Now obviously I'm only offering one of them. So watch this. Hifrish chatos lachrayis. So what's that halacha? Miskaper ba'achas mehen. So you only go ahead and you use one of them. I will say now, obviously, the mistake I made over here is what? What's the mistake I made? I designated them both. Now that's a bad idea. In other words, the best idea is designate one of them as a chatos, and you can have in mind that, if you lose it, this will be the replacement. The mistake, it could be his kavana, he separated out both animals as a chatos. So what do you do over here? So the Gemara says, miskaper ba'achos mehen. So with one of them, ultimately, again, you achieve kapara, ushniya tira, and the other one is left to graze. So 1 second. Ilu b'Pesach. Kia gavna karav shlamim. But I will say, interestingly enough, in a parallel case by Karban Pesach, if you were to go ahead and separate out 2 animals for Karban Pesach, one to be offered, one for achrayis. So ultimately, again, the one offered up as a Pesach is the Pesach, and the other one will be offered up as a shlamim. So I will say, so again, all the Gemara is doing is, the Gemara beforehand tried to indicate that there's this connection between chatas and Pesach. The Gemara is just showing it doesn't seem to line up. Ella, Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon sphere. Rather, Shmuel holds like Rabbi Shimon. Da'amar, Chamesh Chataos Mesos. Ultimately, again, because he holds by this idea, this case of Chamesh Chataos Mesos, and again, by the case of Karban Pesach, they will be offered up as Shlamim. V'ha Roa Rabbi Shimon less like Klau. But Rabbi Shimon ultimately, again, does not have a case of Roa at all. There is no case of being sent out to graze. Shmuel Nami Chadakamar. Shmuel also is referring to one case, or one category. Kol shebechatos mesa, the Pesach karav shlamim. Both say, so Shmuel really only subscribes to one side of that equation, namely, any case of a chatos that's left to die, which are the 5 cases we mentioned in Rashi and Amud Aleph, if any of those 5 cases ultimately again occur by Pesach, any of the 5 cases by chatos, where the chatos is left to die, those are the 5 cases we saw in Rashi, ultimately again by Karban Pesach, and if any of those circumstances come up, they'll be offered up as a shlamim. Umay kamash malon. What is it? What's the chiddush? Lafukim mit Rabbi Yochanan. Da amar ein ha Pesach karav shlamim. Ela shenimtza achar shchita. I will say it's coming to exclude the position of Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said the only time that a Karban Pesach is offered up as a shlamim is when again I had A, lost A, replaced it with B, and now what? Slaughtered B, and then found A. That's when A is immediately offered up as a shlamim. Aval kodem shchita. But if halacha l'maisa I find A before I slaughter B, lo. Halacha l'maisa again, then A is not offered up as shlamim. So what happens to A? From the Mishnah, what happens to A? set out to graze, develop a mum, sell it off, use the money to buy shlamim. Alma, shchita kava. Therefore, again, I would have thought that based on this shchita is the kovea, kamash molan chatzos kava. Therefore, the Gemara is saying that according to this opinion, remember, it's not shchita, but it's chatzos. So both say, I want to point out over here, we have two different models, both riveting, which is, here's what I know. When I lose a Pesach, replace with another animal, then find the original one, there's two possibilities over here. When I find A, either A is going to be offered up itself as a shlamim, or A is going to have to set out to pasture and ultimately develop a mum, be sold off, use the money to buy shlamim. How do I know which one is which? So it's all based on the concept. Just so you understand, it's a very logical sugi. Someone was telling me last night that this Gemara is impossible to understand. Too difficult. It's not, right? It's beautiful. It's mistaber. So again, what do you begin to see? So it all depends on the dichui. Whenever you have two karbanos of the same identity, one is going to be offered up, and the other one pretty much is set aside for non-use. That's just what's going to happen over here. It's just going to be set aside for non-use. So therefore, I will say what comes out over here is, when is it that we assume that B has been offered up? So in version 1, it's the actual slaughter and offering of B. So if B has been slaughtered, if B has been shechted and offered up, then halacha l'maaseh, if you find A afterwards, A could be offered up as a shlamim. According to the second version, it's not about shechita. What is it about? It's about chatzos. In other words, once the zman for Karban Pesach ultimately again comes about, it's as if B has already been shechted. So because it's as if B has been shechted, even though B has not yet been shechted, halacha l'maaseh, A can be immediately offered up as a shlamim. So those are the two versions we'll see in the Rambam which we do, or which we hold. Like Lishnachri, Nabal said alternate version of this. Vilu Pesach heicha da'avad v'nimsa achar chatzos. Kodem shchiti karesh tamim. Now, in this alternate version, this is asked as a question: are you telling me then that when the original carbon is found, when A is found, and then ultimately again it is found after chatzos, even before the shchita of B that is offered up as a shlamim, to which the Gemara says Shmuel karabas firle, Shmuel holds like Rabba, da amar shchita kava, that shchita is the kovea. So we'll say that ultimately again, the identity of A, what you're going to do with A, whether you could offer it up as a shlamim, or whether you have to put it out to graze and develop a mum, halacha l'maaseh is all dependent on did you shecht B or not. V'hami dikama Rabbi Yochanan Allah eina Pesach karav shlamim. But yet when Rabbi Yochanan said the only time Karan Pesach is offered up as a shlamim is when elo shenimtza achar shchita, is only when A is found after the shchita of B. Aval kodem shchita lo, but halacha l'maaseh again before shchita, you can't offer up A as a shlamim. You have to set it out to graze. To which the Gemara says, what do you see from here? Ama shchita kava. So we'll say it turns out it's not chatzos that is the kovea, that is the determinant, but rather what? It's shchita that's the determinant. Michlal, the Shmuel savar chatzos kava. Sounds like Shmuel holds that chatzos is the kovea. Ela Shmuel Rabbi Svirle, rather Shmuel holds like Rabbi. Da Amar Avuda Lamisa Azla. He holds that a lost animal that is then found is actually left to die. V'hakal Avudin Rabbi Mason. So, but according to Rabbi, all Avudin are left for me. So Vilu Pesach. So according to Rabbi, that all Avudin are set out to death. So by Pesach, if it was lost ultimately again before Chatzos and found before Chatzos, it would be left out to graze. Kasavar kodim chatzos lav avatu. Because once again, I will say he holds that any animal that is lost before chatzos is never really considered to be lost at all. The kasavar chatzos kava, and ultimately again he will hold that chatzos is the koveh. So we'll say halacha l'maaseh. How do we paskin over here? Because this is incredibly important. Namely, again, what is going to be the status? What is going to be the status of a lost Karban Pesach? I'm supposed to listen to this. Here we go. This is Hilchos Karban Pesach, Perek Dalid Halacha Vav. So the Rambam writes as follows: Misha avad pischo umatza acher shehifresh Pesach acher so v'hari shneihen omdin yakriv eza mehen sheyirtza l'shem Pesach v'asheni yikarev shlam. So we'll say here's the case. First case of the Rambam, very interesting. Someone lost a Pesach. They designated another animal. They then go ahead and find the first one. I have two animals standing in front of me. I can offer up whichever one I want. But when one of them is offered up as a Pesach, one of them is offered up ultimately again as a shlamim. Now watch this. Matzu achar sheshachat pischo However, I guess I just want to point out the Rambam actually paskins dramatically different than our sugya over here. The Rambam says that when you find B, you can pretty much do whatever you want, right? You have two animals in front of you. You offer up whichever one you want as a Pesach and whichever one you want as a Shalom. However, matzu achar sheshachat pischo harezi karev shlamim. And then you're going to say, if I go ahead and I find B after I find A after I shechted B, so obviously again A is offered up as a shlamim. V'chein himer aval imatzu kodem shchita zeh shehifresh however zeh nintzah rai lakiva pesach rai lakiva shlamim. Fine. So I'll say, so again he then gets into tmura. I just want to point out over here the way the Rambam paskins is actually different than the sugya over here, because also according to our sugya, what it sounds like is not what it sounds like. What the Gemara says is, here's what's clear. Everything depends on when you find A. So in one version, if you find A before the shchita of B, if you find A before the shchita of B, then ultimately again A is set out to graze. A is set out to graze. If you find A after the shchita of B, then halacha l'maisa A is offered up as a shlamim. Second approach, it's not a din in shchita, it's a din in chatzos. If you find A before chatzos, A is offered up as a shlamim. If you find A after chatzos, if you find A before chatzos, it's set out to graze. If you find A after chatzos, it's offered up as a shlamim. The Rambam actually doesn't paskin like either of these opinions. Ultimately, again, there's other Gemaras and other Rishonim as well. The Rambam says that if you lose your karban, you lost A, and now you go to you designate B, and you find A before you designated B, what do you do? What do you do? Whatever you want. Whatever you want. One of them is going to be a Pesach, and one of them is going to be a Shlamim. Whichever one you want to offer up as whichever one you want, halacha l'maisa, one is permitted to do. So we'll say in the remaining moment that we have. So I just want to point out something, two very, very exciting things. First of all, incredible Gemara, no? Yeah, thank you. Also, what I also want to point out is that halacha l'maisa, this is you got. Everything in life is a question of your mindset. If you want it to be exciting, it's just like if perhaps you have a case where someone asks you, do I look beautiful? The answer always is yes. Right? Is the Gemara exciting? Oh, incredible. That's it. If you just condition, it's always exciting. Sometimes more exciting, sometimes less exciting. It's always exciting. We'll say tomorrow is our last daf in the 9th parak, and Sunday begins Arvei Pesachim. It's going to be the final leg in our Pesachim journey. And again, all I would venture to say that I'm pretty sure that all of us have seen Arvei Pesachim in some way, shape, or form over our years of learning. It's an incredibly exciting sugya. So we'll say, so again, it's an opportunity. We have one more daf of karbanos, but it's riveting karbanos tomorrow. Incredible karbanos tomorrow. And then Arvei Pesachim. We'll say, so just one word. So it's exciting that we're coming to the end of our Pesachim journey as well. Just one last piece, because I only have a minute until we have to start davening. Just to give you an idea, Purim, Erev Shabbos. So, there's a famous vart of the Rishner, and the Rishner says that one of the interesting halachas by Purim is, normally by tzedakah, if somebody goes ahead and asks you for tzedakah, you have every right to investigate. Every right to investigate, right? And again, that's why somebody comes in, you have every right to see, let me see your tu'udah. Every right. And in fact, one has an obligation, because tzedakah money is kodesh, and you have to be very vigilant about how you spend your tzedakah money. There's one exception to this rule, and the one exception to the rule is Purim. By Purim, the halacha says, Kala poshet yad nosnin lo. Whoever extends his hand, you give to him. And Rabbi Yisrael Ravizhin, the Heilige Rishner says something so beautiful. He says, it's not just the din by tzedakah, it's a din by Purim as well. The day of Purim itself is, as we all know, again, even the holiest day of the year is Yom Kippurim. There's something magnificent about Purim. There's something dramatic about Purim. The Chidah brings down that on Purim, there is a shefa, there is a kedusha that comes into the world that is unlike any other day. And especially imagine this year where Purim is Erev Shabbos, Shtei Kedushos. Erev Shabbos has a different kind of kedusha. Purim has a Meshunadik type of kedusha. That's the Chidah says. The Shtei Kedushos come, and there's an incredible opportunity. So the Rishner says, Kala poshet yad. See, Yom Kippur, if you ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for certain things, you have to be deserving. Rosh Hashanah, you ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for certain things, you have to be deserving. There's one day where you could ask, and you don't have to be deserving of your request, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu may still give it to you. And that's Purim. Kala poshet yad. If you extend your hand, if you ask, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives. We give to each other without asking today, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives to us as well without any questions. Let's let's utilize our tefillah, not just during Shachris today, but Emir Hashem throughout the day, to daven for the things that we need. And if Baruch Hashem, you're one of those people who doesn't need, as the Gemara says, Bani, Mizone, V'chayi, if Baruch Hashem, you have Mishpacha, if Baruch Hashem, you have Parnasa, if Baruch Hashem, you have health, daven for those who don't. Because there are so many incredible individuals in need. And let's maximize the Kedusha of this day. Kala poshet yad nosnin. We should be Zocha Emiras Hashem to tap into the Kedusha of Purim, to tap into the Kedusha of Erev Shabbos, and halavai we should be Zocha Emiras Hashem in the Zochos of beginning Hilchos Pesach on the day of Purim itself, that the Geula of Purim Emiras Hashem should morph before the day is over into the Geula of Mashiach. Mashiach Avosai.